Dubrow Suspicion Files.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are immersing ourselves in a case that, for a few terrifying weeks back in 2012, really convinced a lot of people that the zombie apocalypse had actually begun.
It did.
We're going back to a single, horrific 18-minute window on a sunny Saturday afternoon in Miami, an incident that became known globally as the Miami zombie attack.
It was a shocking, just shocking moment of brutality that happened right out in plain view. But the actual event is really just the prologue to our story.
Right.
Our true mission today is to, well, deconstruct the chasm between the sensational, the cinematic narrative that immediately took root, the story of a super drug monster, and the much more complex, unimpeachable forensic reality that came out later.
A reality that just failed to get the same attention.
It never does.
Okay, so let's unpack this. The scene is Saturday, May 26, 2012. It's under the bright midday sun on the MacArthur Causeway in Miami, Florida.
And the sheer shocking nature of the violence is what immediately propelled it past, local news and right into the global cultural stratosphere.
The assailant was a 31-year-old man named Rudy Eugene. His victim was 65-year-old Ronald Popo, who's a marginalized homeless man.
And the duration of the assault, 18 minutes, is just almost unimaginable.
18 minutes.
Especially in broad daylight on a major commuter artery. And Eugene didn't use a knife or a gun or anything like that. He used his teeth.
His teeth as the primary weapon.
Yes. And the resulting injuries to Mr. Popo were they were catastrophic. Approximately 80% of his face was gnawed away.
Which led to the complete loss of one eye and, the total destruction of his nose and the surrounding facial structure. It's just horrifying.
And the attack only ended when a Miami police officer, Jose Ramirez, arrived. But what really stands out in the official report is the sheer difficulty in stopping Eugene.
Yeah, Ramirez was forced to fire multiple shots.
Multiple shots. Because the initial round simply failed to halt the attack.
And that right there, that's the core of the myth, isn't it?
It's the seed. That inability to respond to lethal force, combined with the perpetrator's nudity and the almost animalistic method of biting. Yeah. It created an immediate, desperate need for an explanation.
A normal psychotic break just seemed, insufficient to explain something so monstrous.
Exactly. And the explanation that rushed in to fill that void wasn't medical or psychological. It was a perfect storm of pharmacological panic, this growing fear of synthetic drugs and, ancient, powerful folklore.
And that is why the label Miami zombie stuck.
Instantly. Society, by 2012, was absolutely primed for this narrative. We weren't just, reading horror stories. The zombie archetype had moved fully into the mainstream.
Oh, completely. You have to think about the cultural landscape after that.
I do. The Walking Dead had premiered 2 years earlier and was, by 2012, a ratings juggernaut. It had embedded the specific, recognizable, visceral image of the impervious, relentless, flesh-eating ghoul right into the public consciousness.
It's true. It wasn't just entertainment either. I remember the bizarre moment when even the CBC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, had gotten in on the joke.
With their Zombie Preparedness 101 guide.
Yes, their tongue-in-cheek guide from 2011. So the script was already written.
The script was pre-written, which meant that when news broke about a naked man eating someone's face who was unresponsive to bullets, the public had a ready-made, terrifying explanation.
The cognitive leap from severe psychotic break to zombie outbreak was instantaneous. It required no evidence whatsoever.
And this cultural priming is what allowed the truly insidious false narrative that Eugene was high on bath salts or some new super drug to solidify. It became an established fact in the media before a single sample had even reached the toxicology lab.
It was a defining moment, really, in modern media cycles.
It was. The horrific nature of the crime itself created this gravitational pull that just sucked in the drug scare narrative, making it incredibly difficult for the quiet, complex truth of mental illness and system failure to ever achieve the same notoriety.
And that's what we are correcting today, by giving that complex truth the deep dive it deserves.
Let's do it.
Okay, so let's move beyond that initial shock and really ground this event in its physical and societal context. Because the context here is, it's absolutely foundational to understanding why things unfolded the way they did.
We have to start with the specific timing. Memorial Day weekend.
Which in Miami coincides with Urban Beach Week.
Exactly. And that draws huge crowds. We're talking hundreds of thousands of visitors. This dramatically changes the entire ecosystem of Miami Beach and critically, the causeways leading to it.
It creates a high-tension environment.
Extremely high tension, especially for law enforcement. You have increased traffic congestion, massive crowds, and a heightened state of alert regarding, drug use, public disorder, the whole 9 yards.
The atmosphere itself was volatile. It was primed for quick judgment calls.
And then you have to look at the location itself, the MacArthur Causeway. It's a functional, critical artery designed solely to move traffic from the mainland to South Beach as efficiently as possible.
But the specific spot, the pedestrian walkway where Ronald Poppo lived and where Eugene attacked him, is what sociologists call a liminal space.
Exactly. Tell me more about that. What makes it liminal in this context?
It's visible, but it's socially ignored.
Right.
Thousands of drivers pass by. They're seeing the water, seeing the concrete barrier, maybe even glancing at the homeless encampments, but their brains are focused entirely on transit.
They filter out static objects, like a person sitting there.
They filter it all out. And this dichotomy, high visibility but zero social connection, it amplified the bystander effect to a tragic degree.
Drivers feel buffered by the physical separation of their cars, the speed of their transit. It makes intervention feel impossible, even when the violence is just incomprehensible.
That makes perfect sense. They're focused on this orderly path, and the attack happens in this pocket of chaos right next to them. But now let's introduce a critical piece of evidence that directly challenged the drug-induced hysteria from the very beginning.
The heat hypothesis.
The heat hypothesis. The meteorological facts of that day provide a powerful, non-pharmacological explanation for Eugene's most shocking behavior, his nudity.
The conditions were, they were severe. We're talking a high of 91 degrees Fahrenheit, that's 33 Celsius, coupled with humidity levels pushing 65 to 75%.
And the attack occurred right at the peak heating hours, from around 1:55 p.m. to 2:13 p.m.
Anyone physically exerting themselves on exposed concrete under that sun would immediately be at risk for severe thermal stress.
And this thermal stress leads us directly to a concept you mentioned before we started, paradoxical undressing.
Right.
If you only rely on the drug narrative, you assume he's stripped because he was aggressively high. But the reality is far more physiological and, frankly, far more tragic.
Indeed. When a person reaches severe hyperthermia, their core temperature is just spiking. The hypothalamus, which controls our thermoregulation, it begins to fail.
And ironically, just before the brain shuts down, it can cause the peripheral blood vessels to dilate rapidly.
And this gives the person a sudden, profound, and totally false sensation of intense burning heat, like a hot flash.
So the desperate reaction, particularly if you're in a state of delirium, is to rip off your clothing to escape this sensation, even if it leads to further exposure.
This provides a clear, documented physiological path to Eugene's nudity, one that is completely independent of bath salts or any other drug.
And what's fascinating here is the small, tangible detail that was found inside Eugene's abandoned car that supports this idea of physiological distress.
The empty water bottles.
Empty water bottles, a crucial nugget.
It suggests polydipsia, an intense, abnormal thirst. On the surface, of course, it's a symptom of dehydration in the brutal heat.
But polydipsia is also a classic, recognized symptom of acute psychotic episodes, of manic states in bipolar disorder, and conditions like uncontrolled hyperglycemia.
So whether it was physical or psychogenic, it confirms a profound systemic failure to regulate his body's most basic needs, which suggests a mind that is just deeply, deeply destabilized.
Let's pivot back to that sociological aspect for a moment. The Causeway is a non-place for travel, but for Ronald Poppo, it was definitively home.
Yes. And when Rudy Eugene drove his car onto that roadway, it represented his last link to any kind of order.
You really see a violent collision of two strata of Miami society that day.
You do. Eugene, driving a car, was mobile. He was ostensibly part of the regular world, even though his life was coming apart. Poppo was static, marginalized, an invisible fixture of the Causeway.
And Eugene's decision to abandon his Chevrolet Caprice, right down the shoulder, doors open, and walk onto that pedestrian path. It represented more than just a physical act.
It symbolized his entry into a chaotic, unregulated mental space. He was crossing a physical boundary that mirrored his own internal fracturing. The attack wasn't random. It was the eruption of an internal collapse onto the nearest, most vulnerable human canvas.
So now we have to zoom in on the men themselves, because the biographical reality of Rudy Eugene and Ronald Poppo stands in just stark contrast to the roles they were assigned in the global myth. Let's start with Rudy Eugene, the man who became the Miami zombie.
The media's portrayal was of a monster, but the biography is, well, it's far more tragic. Eugene was born to Haitian immigrants. He played high school football. He He was often described by acquaintances as mild-mannered, quiet, and possessing a nice smile.
He was, until his early 30s, a man trying to maintain a functioning life, despite, it seems, immense internal stress.
But his life was clearly unstable and escalating toward a crisis. He got divorced in 2007, he was struggling with low-wage jobs like detailing cars, and he had a criminal record that began when he was 16.
And it wasn't just petty offenses. It included a really alarming domestic dispute in 2004 where he threatened his own mother with a gun.
That's a major red flag for escalating mental distress and the potential for violence.
Absolutely. And critically, we look for prodromes, those early symptoms of serious psychiatric illness. In the months leading up to the attack, Eugene exhibited intense, sudden hyper-religiosity.
Right. His girlfriend, Ivanka Bryant, she confirmed they were intensely focused on religious texts, reading both the Bible and the Quran.
That deep, sudden obsession with faith, often in a very idiosyncratic way, is a classic, well-documented early warning sign of psychiatric conditions like schizophrenia or severe bipolar mania.
It signals a mind that's searching for a fixed framework as it begins to unravel.
And this prodrome leads directly to the specific delusion that seems to have triggered the confrontation.
Eugene didn't just attack Papo randomly. He started the argument by accusing Papo of stealing his Bible.
A Bible that wasn't real.
It existed only in Eugene's catastrophically fractured reality. That is a hallmark of paranoid psychotic delusion.
And yet, almost immediately after his identity was released, the media pivoted to this racialized and exoticized explanation, using his Haitian heritage to push sensationalist narratives about voodoo or Caribbean black magic.
This framing served a specific purpose. It distanced the crime from systemic American issues like mental health care failure.
By making Eugene an agent of some foreign superstition, the tabloids could bypass the uncomfortable truth that he was likely a severely ill man who had just slipped through every crack imaginable.
And his girlfriend went on record vehemently denying any occult involvement, but that detail, it was largely ignored in favor of the more thrilling, exotic narrative.
Now let's turn to Ronald Papo, the invisible survivor. His life story is a tragedy of neglect and lost potential.
Papo's background is so often overlooked by the sensationalism. He was a promising young man, a graduate of the prestigious Stuyvesant High School in Manhattan.
Stuyvesant, wow.
Yes. This was a man who started life with enormous intellectual potential, who somehow drifted into chronic homelessness and addiction in Florida, living under that causeway for decades.
He was known to the small community there, struggling with alcohol use, but generally peaceful. He existed outside the mainstream, completely marginalized and unseen, until he became a globally recognized victim.
And Papo's own eyewitness testimony provides the most compelling evidence against the super drug monster theory.
He recounted that Eugene initially approached him and acted nice, even talking about having a bad day at the beach.
Right, before suddenly becoming flustered and turning berserk.
Oh, wait, I remember the detail where Papo said Eugene screamed that they were both gonna die.
Precisely. That specific phrase, the paranoid, grandiose delusion of shared catastrophic doom, is classic acute psychosis. It wasn't the focused rage of a criminal. It was the terrified, disorganized explosion of someone who genuinely believed the world, or at least his life, was ending right there.
What I find truly remarkable is Papo's reaction in the aftermath. I mean, given the severity of his injuries, the blindness, the profound disfigurement, his survival itself is a medical miracle.
And his conduct following the attack was, from all accounts, profoundly moving. Despite the horrific disfigurement, doctors and staff reported that Papo was happy, grateful to be alive, and incredibly stoic. He showed just immense resilience.
And here's a profound detail that offers deep insight into his character. He reportedly refused purely cosmetic reconstructive surgery.
He chose instead to accept his blindness and disfigurement. Think about the significance of that refusal.
For a man who lived decades being deliberately made invisible by society, the world was suddenly staring at him, judging his wounds.
And by refusing purely cosmetic intervention, he was, in a way, claiming the trauma. He accepted his new condition and chose to focus on the reality of his recovery, not on meeting society's expectations of what he should look like.
It speaks volumes about his quiet internal dignity, to survive decades of neglect, only to face this horror with such peace. It's just incredible.
It really is.
Let's shift now into the specific anatomy of the assault, the 18 minutes of horror that defined the event. We can reconstruct this timeline pretty meticulously thanks to security footage and 911 calls.
The descent was rapid. At approximately 1:55 p.m., Eugene abandons his Chevrolet Caprice.
His car is later found with the door open, the Quran, and those empty water bottles we discussed.
He immediately begins walking onto the pedestrian path and begins stripping off his clothes. That profound act of thought disorganization, whether it's driven by psychosis-induced sensory overload or the paradoxical undressing from hyperthermia.
He confronts Papo. The exchange starts, as Papo testified, with Eugene acting nice before the delusional trigger.
The stolen Bible
Causes the sudden violent shift.
The horror sequence began with Eugene beating Papo into unconsciousness. But let's return to that detail that confirms the disorganization of his mind. Eugene stripped Papo of his pants before the cannibalistic attack started.
That detail is so critical. It moves the violence away from simple, targeted aggression and into this realm of chaotic, sexualized humiliation and thought fragmentation.
It was a completely irrational extra step that just confirms a profound break from reality was the driver.
And the moment the world witnessed, or at least heard about, was when Larry Vega, a man riding his bicycle, discovered the scene and alerted the police.
He initially thought it was just a terrible street fight.
Until he realized the man was using his mouth, tearing him to pieces.
And this leads us to the iconic moment that cemented the zombie mythology forever. Vega yelled at Eugene to stop.
And Eugene reportedly paused, looked up, his face smeared with blood, and then delivered this non-verbal vocalization.
He growled at the witness and then immediately resumed the attack.
That growl, which we now know is a symptom of severe delirium, instantly became the sound of the undead in the public imagination.
It provided the auditory link. It wasn't a human shout of anger or pain. It was an animalistic sound of non-communication, completely devoid of reason. The police officers who arrived and were met with that sight and sound were immediately dealing with something they felt was outside the realm of normal human crime.
Which brings us to the termination. Officer Jose Ramirez arrived and ordered Eugene to stop. Eugene ignored the command.
Ramirez fired the first shot, and here's the crucial detail. Eugene did not stop attacking Papo. He continued mauling the victim.
This resistance to lethal force was the cornerstone of the immediate police justification.
It was cited right away as evidence of excited delirium syndrome, XDS, because a normal person, even heavily intoxicated, would register pain and cease the assault.
Ramirez ultimately had to fire 4 more times to finally end the 18-minute ordeal. And that need for multiple shots was instantly used to validate the whole drug and monster narrative.
Which was not a conclusion drawn from evidence. It was a preemptive hypothesis, and it was intentionally engineered for public consumption.
Okay, let's trace the origin of the bath salts myth, which is really chapter 5 of this story.
This is where the story shifts from a medical tragedy to an institutional strategy. The bath salts link did not come from forensic scientists or the medical examiner.
It was a hypothesis immediately generated and promoted by Armando Aguilar, who was the president of the Miami Fraternal Order of Police, the FOP.
Aguilar essentially became the primary media source on the science of the attack, despite having 0 forensic data. He asserted that the attack bore striking similarities to synthetic 𝐏𝐿𝐴 cases.
And he recklessly conflated distinct substances, bath salts, flakka, and the new LSD, into a single, terrifying, viral media narrative.
And this wasn't just some off-the-cuff speculation. It was a calculated communication strategy aimed at legislative and resource mobilization.
He gave the press a really potent, actionable quote. "I have a message for whoever is selling it out there. You can be arrested for murder if you are selling this new LSD to people, and somebody ends up dying."
That statement, delivered right in the initial throes of panic, was incredibly effective in achieving 3 strategic objectives for the FOP.
Right. Deflection, resource mobilization, and sense-making. Let's break those down.
Okay, deflection first. By immediately assigning the violence to a new, invisible, terrifying drug, the FOP could effectively shift public scrutiny away from the question of whether the police response was proportional.
Or whether the officer was justified in needing multiple shots. The focus became the superdrug, not the shooting protocol.
Then second, resource mobilization. The panic created a state of emergency. A synthetic drug zombie outbreak demanded urgent funding, stricter laws, and increased police surveillance and power to fight this external threat.
And finally, sense-making.
It provided the public with a simple, terrifying yet solvable explanation for unthinkable violence. You can pass a law to ban a substance. You cannot easily fund and reform a broken mental health system.
That's a far more complex and politically intractable problem.
Exactly. And the physiological explanation they used to make this drug narrative plausible was excited delirium syndrome, or XDS.
XDS was the perfect tool. It explains Eugene's apparent indifference to pain and the superhuman strength that's often attributed to drug users.
But we have to stress the controversy around this diagnosis. The American Medical Association, the AMA, and the American Psychiatric Association, the APA, the two major bodies defining disease and mental illness, do not recognize XDS as a valid diagnosis.
Why do they reject it? What's the core of that controversy?
They view it as a subjective post hoc label, often disproportionately applied to justify deaths that occur while individuals are being restrained by law enforcement.
So the symptoms, agitation, hyperthermia, unresponsiveness, can be attributed to underlying conditions like psychosis or heart issues or severe drug toxicity.
Precisely. And labeling it XDS often obscures the real cause of death.
But the police union had validation from other medical groups, correct?
Yes. XDS is recognized by groups like the American College of Emergency Physicians and the National Association of Medical Examiners. So for the FOP, it was legitimate enough to build a case.
A neat little package. Bath salts caused XDS, which caused the zombie behavior, thereby rendering the use of lethal force absolutely necessary and justified.
And once that narrative was established, the media just amplified it without any qualification. The media echo chamber took over.
The feedback loop was relentless. Headlines immediately screamed, "Face-eating attack likely caused by bath salts."
And the complexity of mental illness, which is sad, unglamorous, and a systemic failure, it could not possibly compete with the cinematic, horrific, and easily digestible story of the synthetic drug zombie. The fear was too compelling to be interrupted by journalistic nuance.
Which leads us to the moment of truth. Chapter 6, The Unimpeachable Forensic Truth. The global scrutiny surrounding this case meant that the toxicology investigation had to be one of the most rigorous and transparent ever conducted.
That's right. Dr. Bruce Heima, the Miami-Dade medical examiner, knew that whatever his department found, it would be scrutinized worldwide.
So to ensure the results were unimpeachable, he didn't just rely on standard internal testing.
He sent samples to an independent, outside forensic toxicology reference laboratory for dual verification.
And they conducted an exhaustive screen. I mean, they looked for everything, not just the usual suspects.
They went far beyond standard post-mortem toxicology. They screened for volatiles like alcohol, common street drugs, cocaine, meth, PCP, MDMA prescription medications.
And critically, a wide, specialized panel of synthetic compounds. This included MDPV and mephedrone, the alleged bath salts, as well as synthetic cannabinoids like spice or K2.
And this is where the depth of the forensic science comes in. They use highly specialized technology like liquid chromatography tandem, mass spectrometry, or LC-MS/MS.
Which doesn't just look for known drugs, it looks for any foreign chemical compounds or their metabolites that show up as unknown data peaks in the sample.
Exactly. A synthetic cathinone, even a modified one, would leave a chemical signature. The external lab was specifically tasked with interpreting those unknown peaks.
So they were searching for the literal chemical evidence of the monster drug. They left no stone unturned in that search.
And the definitive results, which were released about a month later on June 27, 2012, completely pulled the rug out from under the global narrative.
They were shocking in their simplicity and their conclusiveness.
Within the limits of current technology by both laboratories, marijuana is the only drug identified in the body of Mr. Rudy Eugene.
Only cannabis.
Only cannabis.
No bath salts, no synthetics, no cocaine, no PCP, no LSD, and no alcohol.
Right.
The chemical evidence for this superdrug zombie simply evaporated.
This immediately created massive cognitive dissonance. The public had to reconcile a horrific act of public cannibalism with a substance typically associated with lethargy, the exact opposite of hyperaggression.
So we have to analyze the three hypotheses that were put forth to explain this discrepancy.
Right. Let's address the most common counterargument first. Hypothesis A, the undetectable drug.
This theory, which was driven by the FOP and others, argued that chemists modify synthetic drugs faster than the labs can keep up, meaning Eugene used something so new it simply slipped past the test.
And forensic toxicologists noted this was, theoretically possible.
But the rigor of the investigation makes that difficult to accept, right?
Extremely difficult.
Right.
Given the LC-MS/MS specialization of the external lab, which was specifically searching for unknown data peaks and metabolites, the probability that a potent psychoactive drug capable of inducing an 18-minute state of superhuman strength and indifference to bullets would leave zero chemical signature is, well, it's extremely low.
So the finding was not an absence of evidence. It was evidence of absence for the specific chemicals that were suggested.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, next, hypothesis B, cannabis-induced psychosis.
While cannabis is typically a depressant, in rare cases, especially with high-potency strains, it can act as a trigger, precipitating acute psychotic episodes in individuals who are already predisposed to serious mental illness.
It can trigger profound paranoia, delusions, and thought disorganization, leading to chaotic or disorganized violence.
So the marijuana might have been the spark, but it probably wasn't the engine.
Which brings us to hypothesis C, the schizophrenic break, the most likely and scientifically grounded reality.
This synthesizes all the evidence we have. The biographical instability, the history of domestic violence, the clear prodromes like hyper-religiosity, the specific delusion about the stolen Bible.
The profound disorganization of stripping, the physiological distress like polydipsia and paradoxical undressing, and the frantic disorganized violence.
All of this maps perfectly onto a catastrophic mental health crisis, likely acute schizophrenia or bipolar mania hitting its explosive peak.
So the cannabis in this scenario wasn't the monster maker. It was perhaps a tragically failed attempt at self-medication, used by a mind desperately trying to quiet itself.
The conclusion is inescapable. Rudy Eugene was not a monster created by a new drug. He was a human being failing rapidly due to an underlying untreated mental illness, leading to a catastrophic and ultimately fatal explosion of violence. It represents a failure of the healthcare system, not a failure of toxicology testing.
This brings us to the truly disturbing aftermath. Chapter 7, the legislative and societal fallout. The irony here is just palpable. The laws were set in motion by the immediate panic, and they were passed based on the lie.
We witnessed legislating by anecdote.
Yes. Despite the definitive toxicology report proving the drug connection was false, the political capital generated by the myth was just too strong to be reversed. The incident became a powerful, emotional rallying cry for stricter drug enforcement.
We saw this play out almost immediately. Miami-Dade County commissioners explicitly and publicly cited the Causeway attack when they voted to ban the sale of bath salts and related compounds.
Even after the report came out exonerating those drugs.
Even after. And this wasn't just local. New York State Senator John Flanagan directly cited Rudy Eugene's vicious mauling in his push to pass felony criminalization for the possession and distribution of synthetic drugs.
The rhetoric was always about preventing the next face-eating attack, thereby linking a known lie directly to state and federal policy changes.
And the impact was national. The public terror generated by the Miami incident was directly used by the DEA and Congress to justify scheduling dozens of synthetic compounds under the Controlled Substances Act, a massive expansion of federal drug enforcement power.
The irony is absolutely palpable. Laws were passed to prevent another Miami zombie attack by criminalizing and banning substances that Rudy Eugene had not ingested.
Relying entirely on a narrative engineered by law enforcement and amplified by the media.
And this reveals a critical societal preference, doesn't it? Why the drug narrative won and the mental illness reality failed to gain traction. Why do we prefer the monster story?
Because a drug epidemic, as terrifying as it is an external enemy. Society can fight it with bans, arrests, police funding, and border control. It's a defined problem with a clear, aggressive solution.
But mental illness, especially on the scale we saw in Eugene's case, is an internal societal failure.
It requires systemic reform, massive healthcare funding, compassion, and uncomfortable introspection into why we allow people to unravel in the first place.
Clinging to the drug narrative allowed society to externalize the blame. It allowed us to view the event as an isolated anomaly caused by a villain drug, rather than as a symptom of chronic systemic neglect.
The failure to treat Eugene and the failure to provide shelter and services for Papo. Both men were victims of systemic marginalization, yet one was framed as a monster and the other as a disposable victim.
And the myth proves to be immortal. This is a classic example of the continued influence effect.
It is. The retraction, the forensic truth that it was only marijuana never achieved the virality, the stickiness, or the cultural power of the initial lie.
The initial myth was just too compelling, too cinematic, and too perfectly timed to die.
And even today, over a decade later, if you search for the Miami zombie, you will find it entrenched in top 10 drug freakout lists and urban legends. The terrifying image of the bath salt zombie is simply too potent for the mundane truth of mental illness to overcome.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we're left with two distinct realities that emerged from that 18-minute window on the causeway.
The first is the narrative reality. Rudy Eugene as the zombie, a monster created by a superdrug, justifying a shooting and fueling a legislative crusade against synthetic compounds.
This reality was constructed by fear, institutional self-interest, and sensationalist media.
The second is the medical reality. Rudy Eugene as a human being suffering a catastrophic, likely schizophrenic psychotic break, who was failed by every social safety net available to him. He was a madman in the grip of delusion.
Attacking another marginalized human being, Ronald Popo, who was himself a victim of systemic neglect.
The divergence highlights a profound societal preference. When faced with the incomprehensible horror of a mental health explosion, we overwhelmingly choose to believe in the monster over the madman.
Because the monster can be shot and banned, and the problem, at least on the surface, goes away.
But the madman requires us to look inward at the cracks in our healthcare and poverty systems, and at our collective responsibility to those who are visibly unraveling in our society.
The true legacy of the Miami zombie incident isn't a warning about synthetic drugs. Is a testament to how easily fear and political expediency can just cannibalize the truth.
We've spent this time separating that fear from the facts, peeling back the layers of the myth. But we leave you with this final, provocative thought to consider as you move forward with this knowledge.
The deepest failure exposed by the Miami zombie incident wasn't a forensic failure. Our labs proved they could identify the truth.
The failure was that we lacked the societal infrastructure and the political will to intervene when a man, displaying clear, documented prodromes of psychosis, hyperreligiosity, dangerous delusions, and a history of escalating violence, was visibly descending into catastrophic madness.
We have to ask ourselves what cost we, as a society, are truly willing to accept. The massive systemic cost of functional, accessible mental health care.
Or the higher, far more visceral cost of waiting and ignoring the madman until he reaches his breaking point and tragically explodes, becoming the monster. That is the knowledge we hope you will take with you.